What if the foundation of every modern city, laws, markets, even schools, was born thousands of years ago in the land between two rivers? Ancient Mesopotamia laid the groundwork for the very civilizations we live in today. But how did they transform a harsh desert into the cradle of urban life? The answer will leave you stunned. Mesopotamia, meaning land between rivers, refers to the fertile region nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, an area now largely within modern Iraq, but historically stretching into parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. These rivers were the lifeblood of the region, turning an otherwise arid landscape into one of the most fertile agricultural zones in the ancient world. But their blessings came with challenges. The river's unpredictable floods could nourish or devastate, shaping a worldview that saw nature and the gods who governed it as both generous and volatile. Around 4500 BCE, after centuries of hunting and gathering, people in this region began to settle and cultivate the riverbanks. The nutrient-rich silt left behind by receding floods allowed permanent agricultural communities to emerge. This agricultural revolution made surplus food possible, which, in turn, freed people to pursue roles beyond farming: scribes, merchants, artisans, and priests, laying the foundation for complex urban societies. Managing the rivers was no small feat. Early Mesopotamians constructed intricate systems of canals, levees, and reservoirs to control water flow. These irrigation networks required collective labor and centralized organization, pushing society toward new forms of governance. It's astonishing to consider that 5,000 years ago, humans were already rerouting rivers and building infrastructure on a scale rivaling later civilizations. This effort didn't just feed people, it bound communities together, giving rise to the earliest city-states. The rivers weren't just agricultural tools, they were highways for commerce and conquest. Boats made of reeds or wood carried grain, wool, and pottery between cities and as far as the Indus Valley or Anatolia. Armies used the rivers to move troops quickly, and city-states constructed vast trade networks along their banks. But river life was precarious. Unlike the predictable flooding of Egypt's Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates often changed course or flooded without warning. Cities like Uruk, once thriving along the Euphrates, eventually found themselves miles from the river that had sustained them. This environmental uncertainty shaped not only infrastructure, but belief systems. Mesopotamian myths and texts such as the Epic of Gilgamesh reflect a deep anxiety about divine will and natural disaster. Floods were seen not just as environmental events, but as signs of the gods' wrath. In response, people built monumental temples, offered elaborate rituals, and prayed for protection and abundance. The absence of natural geographic barriers, no major mountain ranges or deserts, meant Mesopotamia was a crossroads for cultures, ideas, and invasions. While this made the region vulnerable to conflict, it also fostered extraordinary cultural exchange. Innovations in writing, mathematics, law, and astronomy spread from city to city, creating one of the earliest blueprints for civilization. Perhaps one of the most astonishing artifacts from the region is the world's oldest known map, a clay tablet over 4,000 years old that marks rivers, roads, and mountains. It's a testament to how deeply Mesopotamians sought to understand and master their environment. In early Mesopotamia, there was no single unified government overseeing the land. Instead, it was divided into a network of independent city-states, each operating as its own small kingdom. These city-states had their own rulers, armies, and laws, and each was dedicated to a specific patron deity. Cities like Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, and Eridu stand out as some of the earliest urban centers in recorded history, and their influence shaped the development of civilization itself. For the people who lived there, loyalty wasn't to a broader nation, it extended to their city, their king, and their god. These cities didn't just sprout up haphazardly. Each was carefully planned and built around a central temple, called a ziggurat, which acted as both a religious hub and a symbol of the city's identity. The ziggurats were immense, multi-tiered structures, towering over surrounding homes and markets, and were dedicated to the city's patron gods. The Mesopotamians believed these deities governed every aspect of life, from crop growth to military victories, making religion inseparable from politics. The temple complexes surrounding the ziggurats also functioned as political and economic centers, where priests coordinated essential activities like food storage, irrigation projects, and trade agreements. In this way, government and religion were completely intertwined. Initially, temple priests held the most power in these early city-states. But as populations grew and conflicts arose, military needs began to shift this system. Over time, rulers with secular authority, known as lugals or kings, emerged to lead their communities, especially during times of war. Many of these kings were former war heroes who stepped in to address specific crises. Once their leadership proved effective, they often saw little reason to relinquish power, transforming temporary authority into permanent control. These kings worked alongside the temple elite but increasingly dominated the political landscape, establishing hereditary monarchies to secure their family's hold over their city-state. These city-states, however, didn't exist peacefully side by side. With no shared central authority, competition was constant. Battles over land, water, and resources were common, and so were rivalries about whose gods were stronger or more influential. To protect themselves, most cities were fortified with massive walls, designed to keep out raiders or neighboring armies. As conflicts grew, this persistent competition spurred innovation. By necessity, Mesopotamians developed early advancements in warfare, like siege tactics, chariots, and organized foot soldiers, further shaping the region's military legacy. Despite their rivalries, the city-states shared many cultural ties. They spoke related languages like Sumerian and later Akkadian, worshipped overlapping pantheons of gods, and used similar systems of writing. They also participated in trade networks that exchanged everything from grain to luxury items like metal or lapis lazuli, ensuring economic interdependence even during periods of conflict. This cultural cohesion allowed for the rapid exchange of ideas, shaping recognizable Mesopotamian identity. Interestingly, some city-states even developed early law codes before the famous Code of Hammurabi. For example, the Code of Ur-Nammu, dating back to around 2100 BCE, detailed legal precedents surrounding property and justice. These laws underscored the effort to bring order to societies that were constantly evolving in scale and complexity. Ultimately, while Mesopotamian city-states were fiercely independent, they set the foundation for much larger political entities. Over time, powerful rulers like Sargon of Akkad would rise to unite multiple cities under expansive empires. Still, those early city-states remained the laboratories where the concepts of government, economy, religion, and social structure were experimented with and refined. It was in their fertile lands and fierce rivalries that civilization itself began to take shape. Mesopotamia's climate was as unforgiving as it was pivotal in shaping early civilization. The region experienced long, dry summers with intense heat, while rainfall was minimal and unreliable. This made the land naturally inhospitable for farming, but the presence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers changed everything. These rivers turned the arid plains into fertile farmland, capable of supporting large populations. However, this abundance came with challenges. Annual flooding enriched the soil with silt, but was wildly unpredictable. Floods could arrive too early, too late, or with destructive force, washing away entire harvests and threatening the survival of entire cities. The solution was irrigation, and early Mesopotamians became pioneers in water management. They engineered a complex system of canals, ditches, levees, and reservoirs to divert the river's water to their fields. These systems allowed them to control water flow, ensuring fields remained productive even when rains failed or floodwaters became excessive. Without modern machinery, this work depended entirely on human and animal labor. Workers dug canals using hand tools, moving enormous amounts of earth to create a network that stretched across the region. Maintaining these structures was equally labor-intensive, requiring constant community effort to clear silt buildup or repair damage caused by seasonal floods. The crops that flourished in Mesopotamia's fields were staples of human survival. Wheat and barley, the foundation of early agricultural diets, thrived here. Farmers also cultivated lentils, chickpeas, onion, garlic, and dates. As time went on, flax was grown to produce textiles, and grapes were introduced, adding to the variety of crops traded with nearby regions. The combination of fertile soil and efficient irrigation led to surplus yields, a revolutionary development that allowed society to grow far beyond subsistence farming. With more food available than the population needed to survive, new jobs emerged: scribes, artisans, traders, and priests, all supported by the abundance created in the fields. One of the tools that helped farmers boost productivity was the plow. Initially pulled by humans, the design later integrated animals like oxen to move the plow more efficiently, an innovation that significantly increased crop yields. Some of the earliest agricultural tools, even in their primitive forms, marked the beginning of farming becoming a specialized and efficient industry. Yet, even with these advancements, Mesopotamians faced an enemy they could not entirely control: the climate. A subtle change in rainfall patterns or river behavior could have catastrophic effects. Droughts dried up fields and forced migrations, while flooding damaged irrigation networks and delayed planting. Over centuries, another problem emerged: salinization. As irrigation water evaporated in the fields, it left behind salt deposits in the soil, slowly reducing its fertility. By around 1700 BCE, some southern cities like Uruk experienced agricultural decline as salt buildup turned once productive lands into barren stretches. Despite these risks, Mesopotamian farmers played a critical role in supporting their societies. They paid taxes, often in the form of grain, to temples and palaces, which stored surplus crops for trade or emergencies. These distributions helped sustain the population during poor harvests, ensuring some level of stability even in uncertain times. This interdependence between farmers and their rulers tied the agricultural system closely to the rise of governance and organized statecraft. Evidence of their ingenuity still survives. Some of the ancient canals built by the Sumerians and their successors remain visible from satellite images today, a testament to their precision and scale. What's more, they didn't just stop at digging canals. They also developed early versions of agricultural calendars based on lunar cycles. This helped them track the best times to plant and harvest crops, combining observation of nature with structured planning. These early calendars, though primitive, represent one of humanity's first steps toward a scientific understanding of the environment. Agriculture wasn't just the backbone of Mesopotamian survival, it was the foundation of its civilization. The ability to farm efficiently didn't just feed people, it allowed them to specialize, innovate, and expand their cities. Without farming and irrigation, there would have been no Mesopotamia, no towering ziggurats, no workshops producing fine goods, and no written records etched into the clay. The story of Mesopotamian agriculture is the story of how humanity learned to tame its environment, even in the face of nature's unpredictability. Cities like Ur, Uruk, and Babylon were the beating hearts of ancient Mesopotamia, showcasing the earliest examples of what we now consider urban life. These cities weren't just clusters of houses, but fully developed hubs of religion, trade, governance, and culture. Uruk, often regarded as the first major city in human history, stretched over an area of about 900 hectares and was surrounded by massive walls, an architectural feat in its time. These walls, built by workers under central authority, symbolized both protection and the city's growing power. Inside, Uruk's streets buzzed with activity. It housed marketplaces, workshops, administrative buildings, and temple complexes, all contributing to its lively character. With a population potentially surpassing 50,000 people, Uruk might have outshone some of the largest cities in the medieval world thousands of years later. Ur, another key city-state, was equally impressive. Positioned near the Euphrates River, it served as a major religious and trading hub. Its centerpiece was the Great Ziggurat, a towering temple dedicated to the moon god Nana. The structure, a testament to architectural ingenuity, was built from mud bricks and rose above the surrounding flat landscape. Beyond its religious significance, Ur demonstrated advanced infrastructure with features like drainage systems and homes that were sometimes multi-storied. Urban planning here wasn't just about function, it was about creating a city that could adapt to the unpredictable challenges of the environment while reflecting the god's authority on Earth. Then there was Babylon, which rose to international fame centuries later and became synonymous with grandeur. It reached its peak under King Nebuchadnezzar II, who constructed the iconic Ishtar Gate, a vividly decorated ceremonial entrance adorned with glazed bricks and images of lions, dragons, and bulls. The city's walls were so monumental that ancient writers claimed a 4-horse chariot could be driven along their tops. Whether or not this claim is exaggerated, it demonstrates how Babylon was perceived as a beacon of strength and innovation. Though Babylon's fame came later than cities like Ur and Uruk, its legacy as a cultural and economic center was unmatched in the region. Life in these cities was vibrant but far from quiet. Craftsmen hammered away in workshops producing pottery, tools, and textiles. Merchants filled the markets, trading grains, precious stones, oils, and even goods imported from distant lands like the Indus Valley or Egypt. Temples dominated the urban landscape, not only as places of worship, but as centers of administration and employment. Priests played dual roles, overseeing both religious rituals and economic affairs, such as the storage and redistribution of grain. These temple economies employed vast numbers of people, from farmers and artisans to scribes and accountants. The social interaction extended to public spaces, where people shared courtyards, ovens, and water sources. Family-owned businesses were a common sight, and guilds or workshops created a sense of community among artisans. The concept of privacy as we know it didn't exist. Urban life revolved around shared spaces and communal responsibility. What's even more fascinating is how cosmopolitan these cities were. Traders from different regions speaking various languages mingled in the bustling markets, introducing goods, ideas, and technologies from afar. This interconnectedness wouldn't have been possible without the city planning that organized these lively centers. Residential districts housed families, divided by social status. Nobles lived closer to temple complexes, while commoners occupied simpler homes further out. Roads and canals linked these districts, and public works projects like granaries and irrigation systems were essential for sustaining the city's population. Maintaining these projects required a system of corvée labor, in which citizens periodically worked on state-run initiatives like building roads or repairing canals. In a broader sense, these cities reflected the ingenuity and adaptability of Mesopotamian society. From their monumental ziggurats to their advanced trade networks, cities like Uruk, and Babylon weren't just centers of activity. They were the result of humanity's first great experiment in building an organized and interconnected way of life, one that still resonates in how cities operate today. Homes in Mesopotamia were both a practical necessity and a reflection of the society's values and ways of life. At their core, they were built using sun-dried mud bricks. This material was abundant, inexpensive, and relatively easy to work with, making it an ideal choice for construction. However, it came with a trade-off. Mud brick structures were prone to wear and tear from weather, requiring constant maintenance. Rain, though rare in Mesopotamia, could erode the bricks and damage walls if repairs weren't carried out regularly. Over time, homes had to be rebuilt or patched, creating a layered archaeological record of generations living in the same space. The structure and layout of these homes varied depending on wealth and social status. In poorer households, families lived in simple one-room huts, often little more than square spaces with basic furnishings. Wealthier Mesopotamians, on the other hand, resided in multi-room houses that featured central courtyards. These courtyards were the heart of the home, providing fresh air, natural light, and a private outdoor area for activities like cooking, weaving, and gathering. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a living room or backyard. Larger homes sometimes incorporated second stories, which were rare and costly to construct. These upper floors were supported by wooden beams and showcased the homeowner's prosperity. Homes in Mesopotamian cities were densely packed, connected by narrow alleyways that wound through the neighborhoods. These streets provided access to shared resources like water wells or communal ovens. The walls of most houses faced directly onto these alleys with few or no windows, a design that ensured both privacy and protection from the intense heat of the Mesopotamian sun. Instead, openings faced inward toward the courtyard, creating a space that was shielded from the public eye while still allowing ventilation during scorching summers. Flat roofs were another distinctive feature of Mesopotamian homes. Families used these spaces in various ways, as sleeping areas during hot nights, as places to dry food or laundry, or even as locations for small shrines dedicated to household gods. These roofs extended the functional space of the home, providing relief from the enclosed indoor environment and an escape to the open air. For many, the roof was an integral part of daily life, blurring the line between what was inside and outside. Inside, homes were practical rather than luxurious. Furnishings typically included reed mats for sitting or sleeping, clay ovens for cooking, and low tables or stools. Storage was built into walls. Niches and shelves provided spaces to keep food or tools organized. While wealthy families might decorate their homes with more refined items, like finely made pottery or wall adornments, most interiors were sparse and utilitarian. Despite their simplicity, these designs prioritized function and efficiency, reflecting the working lifestyle of most Mesopotamians. Waterproofing these structures presented a challenge, but Mesopotamians found a solution in bitumen, a naturally occurring form of asphalt. They applied it to walls and roofs to make them more resistant to weathering. This innovation was both practical and evidence of their advanced understanding of materials long before modern science. Perhaps one of the most surprising discoveries about Mesopotamian homes is their concern for sanitation. Archaeologists have found evidence of some wealthier homes that included toilets connected to basic drainage systems. Though rare, these early attempts at sanitation show a clear interest in hygiene and urban living standards. It's fascinating to consider how much effort went into engineering solutions for comfort and functionality even thousands of years ago. Most houses were built by the occupants themselves or inherited through the family. As families grew or changed, homes could be expanded, often upward or outward depending on available space. This created structures with a patchwork-like quality, reflecting the lives and histories of the families within. Housing wasn't just shelter, it also communicated social standing and values. Many homes had small altars for daily worship at home, highlighting the deeply religious aspect of Mesopotamian life. Furthermore, the tightly packed neighborhoods and shared walls between homes fostered a sense of community. Urban housing leaned heavily on efficiency, adaptability, and communal living, shaping the cities into compact, vibrant centers of life. Temples in Mesopotamia were more than religious buildings. They were the centerpieces of every city and essential to its society. Each temple was dedicated to a specific patron deity who was believed to protect the city and ensure its prosperity. These structures dominated the skyline, their towering presence serving as a constant reminder of the god's power. This connection between religion and urban life wasn't limited to worship. Temples also operated as economic and administrative hubs, managing food supplies, employing workers, collecting taxes, and even overseeing local trade. They were vital to the functioning of the city, merging spiritual belief with practical governance. The ziggurat was the most iconic feature of Mesopotamian temples. Built with millions of mud bricks, these tiered structures rose high above the flat landscape, their steep steps leading toward the heavens. Despite the religious purpose, ziggurats weren't places for public worship. Ordinary citizens were not permitted to enter the uppermost levels. These sacred areas were reserved for priests and officials who carried out rituals and offerings to appease the gods. Daily ceremonies often included animal sacrifices, burning incense, and presenting food or drink as gifts. The belief was simple. Keeping the gods happy meant ensuring the city's well-being. If neglected, misfortune, from crop failure to floods, might follow. Ziggurats symbolize the link between heaven and earth. Their design reflected an effort to bring humanity closer to the divine realm, showcasing the importance of the gods in political and social life. One of the best-known examples is the Great Ziggurat of Uruk, dedicated to Nana, the moon god. This structure stands as a testament to Mesopotamian architectural ambition, rising in massive stepped layers built entirely from mud brick. Although now partially restored, its original grandeur likely inspired awe in anyone who beheld it. For the people of Uruk, the ziggurat wasn't just a religious site, it was a defining symbol of their identity and devotion. Temples weren't just places of worship, they operated as economic powerhouses. They often controlled vast stretches of land, used for agriculture to produce surplus food. This surplus was stored in the temple's granaries and redistributed to workers or used as a form of trade. Temple workshops employed artisans and laborers to produce goods like pottery, textiles, and jewelry, which were essential both for the local economy and for long-distance trade. Priests, who were seen as intermediaries with the gods, acted as managers of this complex system, overseeing resources and ensuring the temple met both its spiritual and material needs. It wasn't just daily life that temples influenced. They were also centers of learning and innovation. Many temples housed schools for training scribes, who learned to write cuneiform on clay tablets to keep records of accounts, laws, and religious texts. They also became hubs for scientific pursuits, particularly in the fields of astronomy and medicine. Observing the heavens was a deeply religious activity, but it also had practical benefits, like helping farmers determine planting and harvesting seasons. This unique blend of faith, education, and science made temples integral to Mesopotamian intellectual life. Interestingly, ziggurats may have inspired later cultural myths. Some scholars connect them to the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, described as a structure humans built to reach the heavens before being thwarted by divine intervention. While the story's accuracy is uncertain, it captures the perception of these massive temples as both ambitious and sacred. Their construction alone was a monumental task. Without cranes or modern tools, workers relied entirely on human and animal labor to shape and place millions of bricks. The scale of effort required reflects not just their technological capability, but also the importance of religion in unifying labor and resources toward a common goal. By combining spiritual and practical functions, temples and ziggurats shaped both the physical and social landscapes of Mesopotamian cities. They reflected humanity's attempt to connect with the gods while serving as pillars of economy, science, and culture. Beyond their physical grandeur, these structures left a lasting legacy of how ancient societies integrated belief into every aspect of life. Mesopotamian cities were more than places to live. They pulsed with life through bustling public spaces that balanced necessity and community. At the heart of these spaces were the markets, or bazaars, which operated as the lifeline of the economy. Here, merchants filled the air with the clamor of bartering, offering goods that ranged from essentials like grain, livestock, and textiles to rare luxury items like lapis lazuli, brought from as far as modern-day Afghanistan, or fragrant cedar wood imported from the forests of Lebanon. These markets didn't thrive on chaos, but functioned under strict regulations. Municipal overseers used standardized weights and measures to ensure fair trade and penalize dishonest merchants swiftly. This level of control gave citizens and traders alike confidence in economic life while creating a sense of order in the frenzy of daily exchanges. Defending this urban vibrancy were the massive city walls that encircled many Mesopotamian settlements. Made from mud brick and often reinforced with towers and battlements, the walls formed an imposing barrier against both invading armies and natural forces like floods. They were feats of engineering, requiring coordinated labor from thousands of people to construct and maintain. Babylon's walls, in particular, earned legendary status. According to the historian Herodotus, these walls were so broad that a chariot drawn by 4 horses could ride atop them side by side. While modern scholars debate the accuracy of his claims, the story demonstrates the awe inspired by Babylon's defenses, which symbolized the city's strength and prosperity. City gates were crucial parts of these fortifications, but they were far more than just practical entry points. Often named after deities or kings, they carried ceremonial and symbolic weight. The Ishtar Gate of Babylon, for instance, dazzled visitors with its glazed blue bricks decorated with reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls, all symbols connected to divine guardianship and power. Gates like this weren't just practical structures, they projected the city's cultural identity. Ritual processions would pass through them during festivals, further blurring the lines between the spiritual and the everyday. Inside these walls, Mesopotamian cities carried a network of roads and alleyways designed to connect every crucial part of urban life. Main roads linked temples, palaces, and marketplaces, facilitating the movement of goods, religious processions, and official business. These roads were often packed clay, or in some cities, paved with stone for durability. The side alleys, often narrow and winding, focused on reaching residential quarters, creating a labyrinthine layout that served practicality rather than symmetry. What's even more striking is the evidence that some cities implemented basic traffic systems. Major roads were designed wide enough to accommodate carts, while pedestrians used smaller, quieter lanes, a clear sign of early urban planning. Beyond linking parts of the city itself, roads extended outward, connecting Mesopotamian cities to one another and to broader trade routes. These early trade networks funneled goods like tin, copper, and precious stones into marketplaces while exporting textiles and agricultural surpluses. Roads also carried armies, allowing rulers to protect their territories, or, just as frequently, attempt to expand them. In this way, roads weren't just pathways through cities. They were arteries of regional power and connectivity, supporting the rise of entire empires like the Akkad and Babylon. Another aspect of public spaces was the presence of large open squares, which served as gathering points for the people. In these areas, the hum of the markets blended with proclamations from officials or judicial proceedings that were sometimes carried out in the open. These squares were social spaces as much as they were practical ones, places where citizens interacted, debated, and absorbed the activity of city life. They served another function as well. They were locations for festivals, religious processions, and public ceremonies, highlighting how much Mesopotamian urban life intertwined with cultural and spiritual identity. One of the most extraordinary examples of urban space in Mesopotamia was Babylon's processional road. Stretching over half a mile, it was paved with limestone and adorned with motifs of lions, symbols of the goddess Ishtar, to mark its significance. During major festivals, such as the New Year celebrations, the road linked the sacred precinct to the rest of the city, illustrating how public spaces bridge the everyday and the divine. These public spaces collectively demonstrate that the cities of Mesopotamia were far more than hubs of survival. They were environments where commerce thrived, religion intersected with governance, and daily interactions wove community life together. From the hum of the marketplace to the massive walls protecting the city, every element spoke to a society that wasn't just adapting to urban life, it was thriving within it. Mesopotamian society was highly structured and rigid, with every individual having a defined place within a clear social hierarchy. At the very top was the king, or Lugal, whose authority stemmed from the divine. Mesopotamians believed their kings were chosen by the gods, granting them not just power, but also the responsibility of maintaining order and justice. The king's word was law, and his role extended beyond politics. He was seen as the intermediary between the divine and the people. Kings often oversaw large building projects, acted as military leaders, and made decisions that impacted everything from trade to religious practices. Their authority was absolute, and many kings were immortalized not only through monuments, but also in myths and epic tales, such as King Gilgamesh of Uruk. Below the king were the priests, who held immense power in their own right. They were the religious leaders of Mesopotamian city-states, acting as the stewards of temples, which were essential to every aspect of society. Priests controlled vast amounts of land and resources held by the temples and directed rituals needed to maintain the gods' favor. This included overseeing offerings, conducting divinations, and organizing festivals. Priests were more than religious figures. They played a vital administrative role, managing temple economies by directing labor, collecting taxes in the form of goods, and distributing surplus grain or supplies. Their knowledge of celestial movements, essential for creating agricultural calendars, reinforced their status as both spiritual and intellectual elites within the hierarchy. Nobles and high-ranking officials occupied the next tier, often comprising the king's extended family or powerful allies. These individuals governed estates, commanded sections of the military, and served as judges or regional governors. Nobles also managed large tracts of agricultural land and presided over tenant farmers, collecting taxes and ensuring the continued productivity of their holdings. Their wealth and status were visibly displayed in their homes, clothing, and burial practices, which were far more elaborate than those of commoners or laborers. Tombs for nobles often contained luxury items and personal effects, a testament to their social importance. Scribes also held a respected position within Mesopotamian society. Literacy was rare, so the ability to read and write gave scribes significant influence. They were responsible for keeping records of trade transactions, legal contracts, religious texts, and royal decrees. Trained from childhood in temple schools, scribes played an indispensable role in the smooth functioning of the city. Their work not only documented daily activities, but also preserved knowledge for future generations. In a society where written language represented order and civilization itself, scribes were considered intellectual elites, even though they did not hold the same political power as priests or nobles. The middle class consisted of merchants, artisans, and land-owning farmers. Merchants facilitated Mesopotamia's vital trade networks, dealing in goods produced locally as well as exotic imports from far-reaching regions like the Indus Valley and Anatolia. Artisans created everything from pottery and textiles to intricately carved cylinder seals, which served as personal identifiers in business and legal transactions. Meanwhile, landowning farmers formed the backbone of the economy, providing the agricultural surplus that sustained the entire civilization. Though not as privileged as the elites, middle-class individuals could accumulate wealth and even own property, offering them some degree of social mobility. Laborers and tenant farmers filled the lower rungs of society. These individuals worked the lands owned by nobles, temples, or the royal estates. They paid taxes in the form of crops or labor and had little control over their economic fate. Despite being essential to the functioning of Mesopotamian cities, they had few opportunities to rise out of their station due to the rigid class structure. At the bottom of the hierarchy were slaves, who were often prisoners of war, criminals, or individuals who sold themselves into servitude to escape debt. While their position was at the lowest rung, slaves in Mesopotamia experienced a society where their rights were not entirely erased. Many could own property, marry, and even start small businesses. Over time, some were able to buy their freedom or be formally released by their masters. This level of opportunity, while limited, set Mesopotamian slavery apart from harsher systems in later historical periods. Social status in Mesopotamia was deeply embedded in every facet of life. Where someone lived, what they wore, and even how they were buried reflected their rank in society. The Code of Hammurabi defined this hierarchy explicitly, listing different legal consequences for free men, commoners, and slaves, underscoring the inequality inherent in the system. Yet, beneath this rigid structure, Mesopotamian society functioned as a web of interdependence. From kings issuing decrees to farmers tending their fields, every individual played a role in supporting the larger civilization. This interconnected structure ensured that, despite its inequalities, the society as a whole could thrive. Women in ancient Mesopotamia lived in a world shaped by complex social structures, and their roles varied significantly depending on their class, location, and the era in which they lived. Wealth, status, and family connections determined much about a woman's life, from whether she managed a large estate to whether she spent her days weaving in a dimly lit home. In early Sumer, historical evidence suggests women held a surprising amount of independence compared to later societies. They could own property, inherit land from parents or husbands, and even sell or lease it for profit. Some women ran businesses, operating as traders or brewers in bustling city markets, while their less fortunate peers might toil in the fields or craft beer for wealthier merchants. Despite socioeconomic boundaries, women's work formed a crucial backbone in both the domestic and economic life of Mesopotamia. For some women, temples provided a path to influence and respect within society. Temple women, especially those in priesthood roles, occupied a middle ground between religious and economic authority. A priestess was far more than a spiritual figure. She could act as an administrator, supervising temple workers, or managing vast temple-owned lands. Others with roles in temple life supported religious ceremonies by singing hymns, crafting intricate offerings, and recording temple accounts. This type of service sometimes brought power and prestige, but access to it was highly exclusive. Literacy and training were typically only available for the upper echelons of women. Formal training as a scribe, for instance, would have required significant family wealth and status. The personal lives of Mesopotamian women still carried the constraints typical of a patriarchal society. Marriage was pivotal in shaping a woman's formal place in her community. It gave her legal status, but also bound her rights tightly to her husband's authority. The marriage contract was a defining element. It outlined property distributions, expectations of dowry, and even what might happen in the event of a divorce. Ancient legal texts, including the famed Code of Hammurabi, show that the law could offer women limited protection if their marriages ended. For instance, a divorced woman might receive her original dowry back or retain control of property brought into the marriage. However, these laws also reinforce strict social boundaries, particularly around fidelity and gendered behavior, punishing women harshly for perceived infractions. One of the standout figures from ancient Mesopotamian history is Enheduanna, a Sumerian priestess and poet whose legacy remains tangible even today. Writing around 2300 BCE, she is credited as one of the first recorded authors in human history. Her work, devotional hymns to the goddess Inanna, was not just religiously significant, but an early milestone in literature itself. Enheduanna's writings reveal her deep devotion while offering glimpses into the religious practices and belief systems of her time. For a woman to have her voice preserved across millennia is itself extraordinary, especially in a society where most people, regardless of gender, could not write. But ordinary women also left their mark, albeit in quieter ways. Records show that some women testified in court, initiated divorce, or even sued to reclaim property rights, hinting that their agency extended beyond the household. Widows could become property managers or heads of their estates, navigating financial challenges independently. However, not all widows enjoyed this kind of autonomy. In many cases, they faced social pressures to remarry or return to their paternal households. This duality in records, freedom for some, restriction for others, reveals the complexity of Mesopotamian life. The stratification of social classes heavily influenced women's experiences. A wealthy woman supervising a small workforce of slaves in her villa lived a world apart from a poor woman brewing beer for sale in a crowded market. Yet, across these divides, women played essential roles that sustained urban life. Whether weaving fine textiles, managing temple economies, or preparing grain for the family meal, their labor rippled through every aspect of society. Childhood in Mesopotamia was far from uniform. It depended heavily on social class, family trade, and even the city-state a child was born into. For most children, daily life centered around their family's work. If that family were farmers, the children would rise before dawn alongside their parents to help with planting, harvesting, or caring for livestock. In urban areas, children often learned trades informally through apprenticeships, shadowing their parents in workshops or markets. Whether a child was weaving cloth in a small home or helping their father at a blacksmith's forge, education often came through doing. But for wealthier families, childhood could look very different. Elite boys, in particular, received formal education in institutions known as edubas, or tablet houses. These schools stand out as some of the earliest organized learning environments in recorded history. Primary aim? Producing skilled scribes. Scribes were in high demand to manage records for temples, merchants, and the government, so becoming one was a coveted path to influence and potentially wealth. Inside the tablet house, boys worked under strict supervision, practicing the art of cuneiform on clay tablets. The curriculum included more than writing. Students also studied math, law, languages, and religion. Teachers ran these schools with uncompromising authority, using sticks to enforce discipline. Some of the clay tablets students left behind even include humorous complaints about their lessons or their harsh educators, showing that the grumbling about schoolwork is truly timeless. Cuneiform itself was challenging to master. This complex script consisted of wedge-shaped impressions carved into wet clay, with each symbol representing sounds, words, or ideas. Writing required intense practice, and students often copied out long lists of names, data, or even religious texts. For many, the process was repetitive and grueling. However, success at school promised a future as part of the city-state's bureaucratic elite. These scribes became the backbone of Mesopotamian administration, preserving knowledge, maintaining records for complex economies, and even shaping history as they documented it. Education, however, was not accessible to everyone. Girls, for example, rarely attended schools. Instead, their education typically happened at home, where they learned domestic skills passed down through generations. Girls in wealthy families might have tutors or even be trained for careers as priestesses or midwives, roles that carried both respect and responsibility. There are even accounts of noblewomen who became scribes, though these were exceptional cases. For the most part, women's formal education was limited, mirroring their narrower societal roles. Meanwhile, poorer children, boys and girls alike, started working from a young age, contributing labor to their families as soon as they were physically able. Religion also played a key role in childhood development. Children learned to recite hymns and prayers, often participating in temple rituals or festivals. These events blended education with community life, as stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh taught values such as courage, loyalty, and respect for the gods. Through these tales and their involvement in rituals, children absorbed the cultural framework that would guide their adult lives. One fascinating feature of their schooling was the use of recycled materials. Clay tablets were expensive to make, and students often practiced on scrap pieces or rewrote over previously smoothed-out tablets. It was a clever solution that served both practical and economic purposes, not unlike wiping a modern whiteboard to reuse it. Some of these tablets reveal rare glimpses into the students' personalities, as they occasionally doodled or inscribed lighthearted jokes, showing that even in ancient times, children found small ways to make learning a little more bearable. Education wasn't just about passing down knowledge. It was a tool to maintain the social order. The skills learned at tablet houses allowed scribes, often from wealthy families, to secure roles in running city temples or governing bodies. This created an educated class who wielded exceptional influence in defining their society's future. For the majority who worked in fields or trades, education came through work itself, but it remained enough to carry them through daily life. Whether elite or working class, a child's early years laid the foundations for their role in one of history's most innovative civilizations. Marriage in ancient Mesopotamia wasn't just a personal commitment. It was a carefully structured legal agreement with economic and social implications. These unions were meticulously arranged by families, often to strengthen connections between households or secure property holdings. The process of marriage typically involved detailed contracts written on durable clay tablets. These tablets, some of which survive today, outlined the terms of the marriage, such as the bride price paid by the groom's family, the dowry provided by the bride's family, and mutual responsibilities. The contracts could even include contingency plans for divorce, illustrating the level of foresight and legal structure tied into what we might otherwise view as a personal relationship. The ceremonies themselves combined legal formalities with symbolic rituals. It was common for gifts to be exchanged between families, reinforcing the economic bond marriage created. After the rituals and the signing of the contract, the union became legally binding, giving a woman her status as a wife within her husband's household. The husband was the head of the family, holding decision-making authority and responsibility for the household's public affairs. The wife, though subordinate in many ways, managed critical domestic concerns, overseeing everything from food preparation to textile production. Her role was indispensable in maintaining the household economy, especially in large families where labor was divided and managed on a daily basis. Monogamy was the norm for most Mesopotamian couples, although wealthier men had more flexibility. If the wife was unable to have children, something highly valued in Mesopotamian society, the husband could take a concubine or a second wife, though this came with additional legal agreements. Fertility wasn't just a matter of personal fulfillment, it was an economic concern. Children were both a legacy and a source of labor, expected to contribute to the family's trade or farming. Even at a young age, children performed tasks essential to the home or fields, reinforcing their role as economic assets. They were also expected to provide for their parents in old age, creating an intergenerational responsibility structure that kept families tightly bonded. Divorce, while less common, was legally permitted for both men and women. Men had greater latitude to end a marriage, especially if the woman was unable to bear children or was accused of serious faults like infidelity. However, the laws of Hammurabi and other legal texts show that wives weren't completely powerless in these cases. A woman unjustly divorced was entitled to retain her dowry and, in some circumstances, property gained during the marriage. This not only provided a safety net, but also discouraged frivolous divorces. Widowed women faced a unique set of challenges, but also opportunities for autonomy. They could remarry, return to their paternal household, or, if financially secure, manage their late husband's estate independently. Archaeological evidence even points to widows appearing in court to defend property disputes, a testament to their ability to navigate legal systems when necessary. When it came to inheritance, traditions heavily favored sons as primary heirs. The eldest son typically received the largest share, following the principle of preserving a male lineage. Daughters, on the other hand, often received their share of family wealth through dowries at marriage. However, in families with no male heirs, it wasn't unusual for daughters to inherit land and wealth outright. In some extraordinary cases, families even turned to adoption, formally including non-biological children to ensure an heir to their household. Contracts recorded on clay tablets reveal that adopted sons had the same inheritance rights as biological children and were fully integrated into their adoptive families. Adoption also served elderly or childless couples, providing security in their later years. Family dynamics weren't always harmonious, and the Mesopotamians weren't shy about documenting disputes. Some wills included harsh statements disinheriting disobedient children, calling out their actions in permanent clay. Insulting your heirs in writing might seem extreme to us now, but for ancient families, it sent a clear message about expectations and discipline. Despite these occasional conflicts, the family structure remained central to every aspect of life in Mesopotamia. From marriages that cemented alliances to children expanding the family's labor force, the household itself was a miniature version of the larger, interdependent society. Kingship in Mesopotamia was more than a position of leadership. It was a sacred institution deeply tied to the divine. Kings were viewed as chosen by the gods, their authority rooted in the belief that they served as mediators between the heavens and earthly realms. These rulers carried titles like Shepherd of the People, emphasizing their role as protectors and caretakers of both the land and its inhabitants. In a society where the gods were believed to control everything from floods to victories in battle, the king's success was seen as proof of divine favor. Failure, however, could be interpreted as a sign of the gods' dissatisfaction, which made their connection to the divine a cornerstone of their legitimacy. The earliest Mesopotamian rulers, referred to as Lugals, meaning big men, often rose to power during crises, particularly through military achievements. Resource management, especially of irrigation systems, was a critical task in land where survival depended on controlling the unpredictable waters of the Tigris and Euphrates. Military prowess wasn't enough to sustain leadership, though. Kings reinforced their authority through monumental architecture that demonstrated both wealth and devotion. Palaces and massive ziggurats not only glorified the gods, but symbolized a ruler's ability to command labor and resources on an extraordinary scale. These structures left no doubt about the king's central role in the city's success, both spiritually and materially. Unlike rulers in some other ancient cultures, Mesopotamian kings were not typically deified during their lifetimes. Instead, they were regarded as agents of the gods, entrusted with sacred duties. Kings were responsible for maintaining order, or ma'at, which encompassed law, justice, and the proper functioning of society. This extended to enforcing legal codes, leading armies, and overseeing religious ceremonies. They played an active role in temple rituals, ensuring that the gods were consistently honored. Failure to fulfill these roles wasn't just a political failure. It risked the wrath of the gods upon the entire city-state. Some kings, however, sought to blur the line between mortal and divine. Naram-Sin of Akkad controversially declared himself a god while alive, a claim that pushed boundaries and caused tension within Mesopotamian ideology. This connection between kingship and divinity was often celebrated in writing and art. Kings commissioned epic poetry that glorified their reigns, linking their deeds to the will of deities. These texts weren't just celebratory, they were strategic. By documenting their divine selection and achievements, kings could reinforce their authority across generations. The Sumerian King List, an ancient document, captures this blend of history and myth, listing rulers who purportedly reigned for tens of thousands of years. Though clearly exaggerated, this list served a purpose. It connected kings with a divine timeline, rooting even contemporary rulers in the semi-mythical origins of Mesopotamian civilization. Collaboration with priests, officials, and scribes was vital in administering these early city-states. Temples, often vast economic hubs, partnered closely with kings to manage the wealth and labor that flowed through their cities. Priests wielded significant power, interpreting omens and advising rulers on matters of divine approval. Scribes, on the other hand, ensured the complexities of governance were meticulously recorded. From tax records to military plans, these bureaucratic systems supported the king's ability to maintain control. Succession in Mesopotamia was rarely straightforward. Power was often passed from father to son, but rival factions, coups, and external invasions made transitions fraught with uncertainty. Some rulers took great care to prepare their heirs, commissioning inscriptions and works of art that celebrated the dynasty's divine connection. Still, the surrounding context often dictated whether a ruler's lineage would endure or dissipate amidst conflict. Kingship in Mesopotamia was not just a title, it was a responsibility woven from religion, governance, and strategy. The rule was to be both servant and master, bridging the fragile relationship between gods and mortals while navigating the very real demands of human civilization. The Code of Hammurabi, created around 1754 BCE, stands as one of the earliest documented legal codes in human history. Commissioned by Hammurabi, the sixth king of Babylon, this set of 282 laws was engraved in Akkadian cuneiform on a towering basalt stele. Publicly displayed, it served not only as a legal framework, but also as a testament to Hammurabi's role as a divinely chosen ruler. By inscribing laws where all could see, he ensured that ignorance was no defense. Any citizen, regardless of class, could theoretically know their rights and obligations. At the top of the stele, Hammurabi is depicted receiving the authority to rule from Shamash, the god of justice, underlining the divine legitimacy of the code itself. Hammurabi's laws addressed an impressive range of issues. They covered everything from property disputes and trade agreements to marriage contracts and crimes like theft. The code also dealt with matters we might not expect to find in ancient law, such as medical malpractice and construction standards. For example, one law stipulated that if a house collapsed and caused the death of its owner, the builder would be held accountable, often with severe penalties. This attention to detail reflects a society grappling with its growing complexity as cities expanded and specialized labor became essential. Infrastructure, commerce, and even personal relationships all required regulation, and the Code of Hammurabi attempted to provide that structure. One of the most famous aspects of the code is its adherence to the principle of lex talionis, often summarized as an eye for an eye. This principle, however, wasn't applied equally across social classes. The code organized Babylonian society into three categories: free men, commoners, and slaves. For the same crime, the punishment could vary drastically depending on the perpetrator's and the victim's status. For instance, harming a free man might result in literal physical retaliation, but harming a slave could carry a financial fine instead. This disparity illustrates the deeply ingrained hierarchy of Mesopotamian culture, where class determined not only lifestyle, but also the exact value of a person under the law. Despite its rigid hierarchies, Hammurabi's code aimed to promote order and accountability. Many of the laws directly addressed fairness in trade and property rights, reflecting the importance of economic stability in Babylonian society. Merchants were protected from theft and fraud, and disputes over contracts or loans were carefully legislated. Even architectural practices were included. Laws established penalties for neglecting irrigation responsibilities, which, in a land reliant on controlled water sources, was a significant offense. Through these measures, the code attempted to balance individual accountability with the well-being of the community. One fascinating element of the code is how it balanced harsh physical punishments with allowances for monetary compensation. While some punishments seem severe by modern standards, such as breaking the hand of a dishonest surgeon, Others show an understanding of negotiation and reparations. Wealthier individuals had the option to pay fines to resolve disputes, illustrating both social inequity and accessibility in law enforcement. The nuance of these laws implied an evolving sense of legal consciousness, where flexibility coexisted with strict penalties. Although the Code of Hammurabi wasn't the first known legal system, laws attributed to earlier rulers like Ur-Nammu existed. It was the most comprehensive and influential of its time. Its impact extended well beyond Babylon, shaping later legal traditions in the ancient Near East, and even being referenced in much later periods. The stele itself, discovered far from Babylon in modern-day Iran, was likely taken as war booty, a symbol of its importance and prestige. The text not only enforced laws, but underscored Hammurabi's vision of justice as a divine mandate, solidifying his legacy as a ruler who sought to unify and protect his people under an organized legal framework. Scribes in ancient Mesopotamia served as the backbone of its intricate civilization. They held a level of importance few other professions could rival, functioning not just as record keepers, but as guardians of knowledge, law, and commerce. Becoming a scribe required years of rigorous training in specialized schools known as edubas, or tablet houses. These institutions were exclusive, primarily accessible to the sons of wealthy or influential families. The art of writing, primarily done in cuneiform, was far from simple. Using a reed stylus pressed into wet clay, scribes had to master hundreds of unique characters representing sounds, words, and phrases. This complexity ensured that writing remained an elite skill, elevating scribes to a respected position in society. A scribe's duties extended across nearly every aspect of Mesopotamian life. They recorded legal codes like the famous Code of Hammurabi, tracked tax collections and trade deals, and logged temple transactions, which often held religious and economic significance. Beyond documentation, scribes maintained royal decrees, court rulings, and even literature such as epic tales or hymns to the gods. Their work wasn't just about writing, it required analytical precision and a deep understanding of the subjects they recorded. For example, a temple scribe needed expertise in religious rituals and temple operations, while an economic scribe navigated the complexity of trade, taxes, and agricultural output. Each niche came with its own demands, but the shared thread was the ability to manage information with accuracy and efficiency. Temples, palaces, merchants, and even farmers relied on scribes to keep the wheels of society turning. Temples, in particular, were major centers of record-keeping, functioning like administrative hubs where scribes documented everything from offerings made to the gods to the labor force employed by temple estates. In doing so, they helped regulate the distribution of resources such as grain and textiles, which temples often controlled. Merchants, operating in an increasingly interconnected world, depended on scribes to log inventories, draft trade agreements, and ensure all transactions adhered to standardized systems of weight and measure. Even simple farmers occasionally needed their services to record land leases, irrigation schedules, or disputes over property boundaries. Interestingly, the work of scribes often carried a personal flair. Many took pride in their skills and left signatures or unique markings on tablets as a way of asserting their expertise. Some went further, adding poetic lines or phrases that bordered on self-promotion, showing that even in antiquity, professionalism and pride in craftsmanship went hand in hand. Their dedication paid off, not just personally, but for posterity. Tens of thousands of clay tablets have survived into the modern age, many preserved by the very act of accidental baking caused by fire. These records offer a window into the day-to-day life, governance, and priorities of ancient Mesopotamia, providing the most detailed account of any civilization. Despite their prominence, scribes weren't solely writers. They wore many hats, acting as accountants, administrators, teachers, and diplomats. They played a key role in advancing Mesopotamian culture, using writing to preserve traditions and promote stability. Scribes didn't just passively record events. They actively shaped history by framing official narratives and ensuring the continuity of knowledge from one generation to the next. Their efforts also preserved the Sumerian and Akkadian languages long after they ceased to be widely spoken. Without the meticulous records kept by scribes, much of what we know about Mesopotamia would have been lost to time. The system of writing they maintained was as versatile as it was complicated. Standard cuneiform varied depending on the purpose. Legal documents had a precision and structure distinct from the flowing forms used in poetry or hymns. Mathematical tables, used for everything from taxation to construction, had their own visual style. This adaptability allowed scribes to cater to the diverse needs of a society that was growing more complex with each passing century. Scribes were more than clerks. They were the architects of memory, building the foundation for administration, culture, and history. By documenting every aspect of Mesopotamian life, they ensured that the achievements of this civilization would endure far beyond its decline. Their clay tablets, carved with diligence and expertise, remain a testament to the power of written words to withstand time. The economy of ancient Mesopotamia was a well-organized and regulated system, deeply rooted in written laws that gave structure to trade, taxation, and property rights. This was a region where resources were scarce, so trade wasn't just important, it was vital. Mesopotamians produced grain, textiles, and pottery, using these goods to acquire raw materials like timber, precious metals, and stone that weren't available in the plains of the Tigris and Euphrates. Long-distance trading networks emerged, extending as far as the Indus Valley and Anatolia, which brought merchants into contact with a broad range of cultures. These exchanges weren't casual. They were governed by contracts that detailed every aspect of the deal, signed and often sealed with unique cylinder seals to certify authenticity. Written agreements ensured both parties were accountable, and witnesses attested to the fairness of transactions. Taxes, too, played an essential role in shaping Mesopotamian society. The government imposed taxes on nearly everything and required payment not just in silver, but also in grain, livestock, or labor. These contributions supported massive public works projects like the construction of city walls, temples, and canals, as well as the upkeep of armies and bureaucracies that managed cities. Temples, which served as both spiritual and economic centers, were also major hubs for tax collection. Tax records that survived in the form of clay tablets reveal astonishing detail. For instance, some listed exact payments owed by individuals, down to the number of sheep or jars of beer due, a strikingly organized way to track obligations in a world without modern accounting. Property ownership was another cornerstone of Mesopotamian law, with regulations ensuring that land, houses, and other assets could be bought, sold, inherited, or leased according to clearly defined rules. Boundary markers, often detailing ownership and agreements, have been unearthed, reflecting the significant attention given to land disputes. Even common farmers engaged in these legal processes, as land was the primary driver of wealth and production. Failing to meet financial responsibilities could lead to severe consequences. Those unable to pay debts often lost their land, or, in more desperate cases, family members who might be sold into servitude to settle the account. Debt bondage, while harsh, was governed by legal terms, and children or relatives sold as servants had the possibility of eventually regaining their freedom. Hammurabi's code, while better known for its strict eye for an eye approach, also addressed trade and property with surprising sophistication. For example, if a caravan was robbed, laws required the carrier to compensate for the losses, protecting the merchants involved. This legal concept bears a resemblance to modern insurance, though the enforcement depended on the resources and influence of the ruler. Similarly, builders were held accountable for the quality of their work. If a poorly constructed house collapsed and caused injuries, the builder could face severe punishments, including his own death if someone perished in the accident. These laws aim to create a sense of trust and fairness in a rapidly urbanizing society. Temples, palaces, and wealthy elites dominated land ownership, often leasing their vast estates to tenant farmers. The profits from these lands bolstered the power of the ruling class while tying much of the population into labor obligations. Despite this concentration of wealth, Mesopotamian laws sought to create structure and predictability, ensuring that even commoners could appeal to legal systems for disputes. Trade also relied on uniformity. Weights and measures were standardized to facilitate fair dealings across regions. Markets, under the watchful eye of overseers, became centers of both commerce and regulation, balancing the needs of buyers and sellers. The careful regulation of trade, taxes, and property laid the groundwork for systems of contract law, financial liability, and property rights that persisted long after Mesopotamia's decline. These laws stabilized an increasingly complex economy and shaped how civilizations managed resources, disputes, and exchanges for millennia. Agriculture wasn't just a part of life in Mesopotamia, it was life. Nearly every aspect of the economy and society revolved around farming in one way or another. The fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers provided the potential for abundant harvests, but it wasn't as simple as scattering seeds and waiting for crops to grow. The land's natural fertility relied on managing the river's unpredictable flooding, which could either irrigate the soil or devastate crops. This delicate balance made agriculture both essential and collective. Farming was a community effort involving extensive planning, labor, and infrastructure. The staple crop of Mesopotamia was barley, the lifeblood of their diet and economy. Barley was used to make bread and beer, but was also so valuable that it served as a form of currency. Mesopotamian farmers also grew wheat, dates, onions, garlic, lentils, and other crops suited to the hot, dry climate. Orchards with date palms dotted the landscape, with the fruit providing both food and tradable goods. Livestock added another layer to farming's importance. Sheep and goats provided wool, milk, and meat. Oxen were critical for plowing fields, and donkeys acted as the primary means of transport for goods and people. One of the most impressive aspects of Mesopotamian farming was their mastery of irrigation. They created a sophisticated network of canals, dikes, and reservoirs to control water. This system wasn't just about redirecting river water. It required constant maintenance to dig new channels, clear sediment, and reinforce levees. Working on these projects was a communal duty, often led by local leaders or temple officials. Without this infrastructure, farming would have been impossible in the arid climate, turning what was naturally a difficult land into a sustainable breadbasket. Irrigation disputes were common, though, leading to detailed legal rulings on water rights. The tools farmers used reflect their ingenuity. They employed wooden plows pulled by oxen to prepare the soil, hoes for manual labor, and, in later periods, even seed drills to evenly disperse crops, a remarkable advancement for the time. These techniques boosted productivity, allowing for surpluses that fed not just farmers, but entire urban populations. This surplus formed the backbone of the redistributive economy. Temples and palaces collected goods from farmers as taxes or offerings, storing them in massive granaries. From there, the grain and other products were redistributed to temple staff, soldiers, and officials, creating a centralized system of resource management. The redistributive system wasn't just local, it tied into long-distance trade as well. Surpluses of grain, dates, or wool were exchanged for materials Mesopotamia lacked, like copper from Oman or timber from Lebanon. These exchanges show how closely agriculture and trade were intertwined. Some records even describe vast temple estates that operated almost like proto-corporations. These large farms were organized with defined labor rosters, quotas for production, and detailed oversight. Payrolls, recorded on clay tablets, list not only assigned workers, but the exact quantities of grain paid out to them as wages. Interestingly, the Sumerians also created the world's first known agricultural manuals. These clay tablets describe techniques for crop rotation, irrigation management, and pest control. It's evidence of a society that not only farmed, but thought deeply about how to farm better. These manuals reflect just how critical agriculture was, and they demonstrate the early stages of harnessing knowledge to increase productivity. Despite their advancements, ancient farming faced constant challenges. The cycles of planting and harvesting revolved around the river's flooding patterns and the seasons, but the natural world was unpredictable. A late flood or extended drought could mean the difference between prosperity and famine. Storage techniques like granaries helped buffer against disaster, but stability was never guaranteed. This uncertainty shaped everything from daily work schedules to religious festivals, and even the timing of tax collection. Farming in Mesopotamia didn't just sustain cities, it made them possible. The surpluses generated from organized agriculture freed up others to specialize in crafts, trade, or writing, paving the way for urbanization and cultural advancement. Agriculture was the root from which everything else grew. Merchants were the lifeblood of Mesopotamia's economy, connecting its cities with distant regions to bring in resources that the land itself could not provide. Trade was not a luxury, it was a necessity. Mesopotamia's fertile plains were excellent for agriculture, but the region lacked essential materials like wood for construction, stone for tools and buildings, and metals such as copper and tin that were critical for crafting bronze. These shortages made long-distance trade indispensable, turning merchants into pivotal figures who ensured the survival and prosperity of this ancient civilization. To acquire these resources, Mesopotamian merchants traveled over a vast network of land and river routes that linked their cities to far-flung places. Anatolia, or modern-day Turkey, supplied timber and metals. The Indus Valley, over 1,500 miles away, offered exotic goods like carnelian and ivory, while regions near the Persian Gulf provided access to precious stones and pearls. Traders navigated these routes using donkey caravans on land and riverboats that glided along the Tigris and Euphrates. Inscriptions reveal how merchants carefully documented their journeys, entering into detailed contracts and using cylinder seals to authenticate agreements. These seals, often intricately carved, acted as a merchant's signature and ensured the legitimacy of their trade dealings. One of the most striking aspects of Mesopotamian trade was its organizational sophistication. Merchants were not always independent operators. Many worked on behalf of temples or the state. These large institutions often financed trading expeditions, hiring merchants to acquire luxury goods for religious rituals or royal courts. Items like lapis lazuli from Afghanistan or gold and incense from the Arabian Peninsula became symbols of power and divine worship, adorning temple statues or royal palaces. Although state-sponsored trade dominated, private merchants also played an essential role. Some even established multi-generational family businesses, proving that entrepreneurship thrived alongside institutional trade. Mesopotamian exports were as valued as the goods they imported. The textiles produced in their cities, especially finely woven wool, were highly sought after across the ancient world. Oil, grain, and pottery also formed key trade goods, showcasing the region's ability to turn its agricultural surplus into economic leverage. However, this level of trade required trust and accountability, which is why Mesopotamians developed early legal systems to regulate it. Some clay tablets document what we might recognize as primitive international trade agreements, complete with clauses on delivery deadlines and penalties for failing to meet terms. These contracts reveal a system of commerce guided by rules that sought to manage risk and promote fairness. The trade networks didn't just carry goods, they carried ideas. Writing systems like Cuneiform traveled with merchants, as did artistic styles and religious concepts. Mythologies, motifs in pottery, and even technological innovations like bronze-making techniques spread along these routes, creating a cultural exchange that was just as transformative as the material trade itself. The influence of Mesopotamian culture seeped into neighboring regions, laying some of the groundwork for shared practices and ideas across the broader ancient world. To succeed in this interconnected economy, merchants needed more than a good sense of direction. They had to be literate and numerate, often relying on scribes to keep detailed records of their transactions. These ledgers listed inventories, prices, and even loan agreements, showcasing a level of economic organization that feels remarkably modern. Credit systems were also in place, allowing merchants to borrow capital for trade expeditions and repay their debts after selling their goods. This adaptability and resourcefulness helped merchants thrive in an unpredictable world. Perhaps the most remarkable evidence of Mesopotamia's trade networks is the discovery of Indus Valley seals in Mesopotamian cities. These small, carved artifacts reveal not only the scale of their trading partnerships, but also the complexity of their relationships with distant cultures. While those seals may seem like small tokens, they represent the vast web of connections that Mesopotamian merchants helped build, connections that enabled the rise of one of history's first global economies. Duplication of that scale wouldn't be seen again for centuries. The artisans of Mesopotamia were the heartbeat of its cities, transforming raw materials into the tools, goods, and art that sustained both daily life and the grandeur of its rulers. These skilled workers produced everything from pottery and textiles to jewelry and weapons, making them indispensable across all levels of society. Their expertise often came from knowledge passed down through generations, with many working within family-run workshops. Some found employment in temple complexes or royal palaces, crafting items that held symbolic or ceremonial significance. Mesopotamia's ability to produce such an array of goods stemmed from the ability of diverse materials like clay, bronze, stone, and bitumen. Precious items like shell and lapis lazuli, acquired through long-distance trade, were also used, linking their craft to broader networks of commerce. Builders, on the other hand, physically shaped Mesopotamia's iconic cities, from simple mud brick houses to massive ziggurats that towered over the landscape. Their work required more than physical strength, it demanded ingenuity. Using simple tools like wooden mallets and copper chisels, they constructed irrigation canals, city walls, and royal palaces essential for both survival and civic pride. Labor on these projects wasn't always voluntary. Many workers were conscripted through a system of corvée labor, a form of tax that required peasants to contribute their labor instead of goods. This system fueled large-scale projects while keeping the elite's coffers full. Artisans and builders did not work alone. Master craftsmen, often considered the most skilled and experienced of their trade, oversaw these efforts and trained apprentices to follow in their footsteps. Unskilled laborers performed strenuous tasks such as digging, brick hauling, or assisting with temple farming duties. Among this labor force, slaves carried some of the heaviest burdens, yet they too were integrated into Mesopotamia's structured economy. Interestingly, some artisans claim their individuality through signatures, including marks on clay pots and intricately carved cylinder seals. These early signatures remind us that even in an era of collective manual labor, personal pride had a role to play. Other innovations show the depth of their craftsmanship. Metalworkers, for example, demonstrated advanced alloying techniques, creating bronze tools and ornaments during the early stages of the Bronze Age. Remarkably, this preceded the widespread adoption of similar techniques in surrounding regions, showcasing Mesopotamia's pioneering spirit. Artisans occupied a middle-class position within the social structure. Own property, conduct business, and sometimes amass significant wealth if their work earned prestigious temple contracts or patrons from the elite. Skilled specialists like jewelers, metalworkers, carpenters, and weavers pushed the boundaries of design. In turn, these advancements influenced not only Mesopotamian culture, but left echoes in neighboring civilizations. For instance, their carved monuments and statues inspired artistic styles far beyond their borders. Despite the grueling nature of their work, evidence suggests a surprising creativity in daily life. Craftsmen didn't just make items of function, they were custodians of Mesopotamia's cultural identity. Rings etched with sacred imagery, textiles dyed in vibrant colors, and ceremonial weapons adorned with scenes from myth, all of these were testaments to a society that valued both utility and beauty. These artifacts weren't just important because they were used, they embodied the stories, beliefs, and innovations of a people who bridged their everyday existence with their spirituality. Builders and laborers shared this legacy, but left theirs in the towering ziggurats and sprawling city walls that still puzzle modern archaeologists. The cities themselves were monuments to collective achievement, products of the ingenuity and effort of all social classes. It's easy to imagine builders pausing to gaze upon the result of years of exhaustive labor, knowing they had left their mark on history. Whether crafting delicate jewelry, producing sturdy tools, or raising monumental architecture, Mesopotamian artisans and builders blended function with creativity. They didn't just shape objects or buildings, they shaped the identity of a civilization that would set the framework for art, urbanization, and communal labor in human history. The gods and goddesses of Mesopotamia weren't just distant figures in the sky, they were woven into the very fabric of daily life. At its core, Mesopotamian religion was polytheistic, with a vast array of deities, each tied to specific aspects of nature, society, and human existence. From the powerful forces of the universe to the intimate concerns of the individual household, there was a divine presence for almost everything. These gods existed within a finely tuned hierarchy, a reflection of the societal structure below them. At the apex stood the high gods, figures of immense power who governed broad cosmic domains. Below them were city gods and household deities, each serving a unique role within their prescribed realm. Some of the oldest and most revered gods were tied to the Sumerian pantheon, which the Akkadians and later the Babylonians would expand and adapt. Anu, the god of the sky and heavens, symbolized ultimate authority, while Enlil, god of air and storms, controlled weather and, by extension, the prosperity of crops and safety of towns. Enki, the god of water and wisdom, was considered a creative force, often credited with helping humanity through his intellect and insight. Ninhursag embodied motherhood and the nurturing aspects of the earth, highlighting the balance between creation and survival. As these deities evolved over time, the Babylonians added new figures like Marduk, who rose to preeminence as the city of Babylon's patron god and ultimately became one of the most powerful symbols of divine authority. Each city in Mesopotamia held a special connection with a particular deity, creating a network of patron gods whose influence extended deeply into civic identity. Ur's connection with Nana, the moon god, or Uruk's devotion to Inanna, the goddess of love and war, reinforced the idea that the gods weren't distant beings. They were protectors, providers, and patrons of specific cities and their inhabitants. This led to the construction of elaborate temples in their honor, filled with cult statues that were cared for as if they were living beings. Priests washed, clothed, and fed these statues with offerings of food and drink, believing the gods needed human service to sustain their presence on Earth. Mesopotamian deities weren't flawless, detached beings. They were anthropomorphic, exhibiting desires, emotions, and even grudges that mirrored human traits. Myths often depicted them arguing, vying for supremacy, or retaliating against those who offended them. In one striking tradition, humans themselves were said to have been created only because the gods grew tired of performing labor, mundane tasks like building and farming, and desired servants to take on the work. This fundamental idea shaped a worldview that emphasized a reciprocal relationship, where humans existed to meet the gods' needs in exchange for divine protection and guidance. Rituals and festivals were central to this relationship. Major events such as processions, sacrifice, and feasts pulled entire cities into collective devotion, blending religious and social spheres. These gatherings reinforced the bond between people and their deities, while priests led prayers and interpreted omens to secure the gods' favor. Inanna, known by the Babylonians as Ishtar, was worshipped with dramatic rituals, including music, dance, and sacred practices surprising in their openness, such as temple prostitution, a polarizing yet fascinating tradition that highlighted her roles in both war and love. The gods shaped more than individual worship. They framed how Mesopotamians understood the cosmos and their place in it. Disasters like floods or famines were attributed to divine anger, often interpreted as punishment for neglect or disobedience. Prayers, sacrifices, and complex rituals sought to appease these powerful beings, maintaining harmony in both the natural and human worlds. These stories didn't just explain the inexplicable, they gave a cultural narrative to justify kingship, provide moral lessons, and celebrate triumphs. Through their mythology, the gods became immortalized, not only in worship, but as the architects of Mesopotamia's cultural identity. It wasn't just temples or hymns that kept their memory alive. It was the belief that every harvest, every storm, and every brick laid by human hands rested beneath the watchful eyes of their gods. Their influence extended far beyond religion, shaping laws, art, and the structure of society itself. Temples in ancient Mesopotamia weren't just places of worship. They were the heart of the city, pulsing with spiritual, economic, and political activity. Each temple was dedicated to a specific god or goddess, serving as their literal home on Earth. These buildings were monumental symbols of devotion, often constructed on the massive platforms of ziggurats that rose high above the urban sprawl. Others sprawled outward, covering large areas with courtyards, rooms for offerings, and administrative offices. The temples weren't made for ordinary people to enter. Instead, their most sacred spaces could be accessed only by priests and temple staff who had the authority to care for the god's statue housed within. Caring for these statues was no small task. They weren't treated as representations, but as divine beings themselves, deserving the same attention as a king or queen. Daily rituals involved bathing, dressing, and adorning the statue with fine garments and jewelry. Priests recited hymns, burned incense, and offered plates of food, which they believed the gods could consume on a spiritual level. These weren't occasional acts. Instead, they were highly regimented, carried out like clockwork to maintain the delicate balance between the human and divine worlds. Neglect wasn't an option. Many believed that failing to perform these rituals could invite pestilence, famine, or other disasters born out of divine dissatisfaction. The temples themselves functioned almost like mini-cities, employing vast numbers of people. Priests, priestesses, diviners, musicians, cooks, and laborers all had roles to play within these massive complexes. Many priests came from elite families, steeped in advanced education that included reading cuneiform, performing intricate rituals, and interpreting omens. Divination was a crucial part of their work. By studying the organs of sacrificed animals, observing star patterns, or interpreting the shapes of smoke, they sought to uncover the god's will. This practice carried serious weight, influencing decisions on war, marriage, and even the construction of public works. One fascinating detail about temple operations was the presence of what you might call divine kitchens. Meals were prepared daily for the god's statues, and these were no improvised offerings. Recipes were recorded in cuneiform on clay tablets, complete with instructions for meal preparation, a testament to the thoroughness of Mesopotamian ritual life. Temples also sponsored large-scale religious festivals that could last for days or weeks. Communities came together to reenact myths, hold processions, sing hymns, feast, and perform sacrifices. Music, dance, and ceremonial displays contributed to the grandeur of these events, turning them into both religious and social milestones. Outside of their ritual roles, temples wielded immense economic power. They managed huge tracts of land used for farming, some of it worked by tenants and laborers whose taxes supported temple activities. Temples also operated workshops, where artisans produced items for religious use and had treasury functions, acting as repositories for grain and other goods that served as currency. This dual religious and economic role made temples indispensable to the functioning of Mesopotamian cities. Priestesses, too, held influential positions within temple life. In cities like Sippar, some women served as Naditu, a class of religious elite who lived in temple compounds and controlled their own property. Although they didn't marry, they exercised remarkable financial independence, underscoring the diverse roles the temple system provided. These rituals and structures weren't mere formality. Mesopotamians genuinely believed that their efforts kept the cosmos in order. The meticulous care of statues, the grand festivals, and the precise rituals weren't symbolic gestures. They were essential to maintaining harmony between the gods, the city, and the natural world. To neglect that connection risked throwing every aspect of life into chaos. And so, temples stood at the center of it all, sacred, practical, and crucial to the survival of one of humanity's earliest civilizations. Mesopotamian myths are some of the oldest stories ever to be recorded, offering a view into the beliefs and values of one of the first civilizations. These tales were more than entertainment. They blended religion, history, and morality into narratives intended to explain the world and teach people their place within it. Among them stands the Epic of Gilgamesh, widely considered the world's first known epic poem. Written originally in Sumerian and later translated into Akkadian, this masterpiece bridges the divine and the human in ways that have influenced storytelling for millennia. Gilgamesh himself was a historical figure, believed to have been a king of Uruk around 2700 BCE. Over time, his legacy grew into a myth, elevating him from a mortal ruler into a semi-divine hero. In the epic, he begins as a flawed, almost unlikable character, arrogant in his power, yet unmatched in strength and ambition. The story's turning point comes with the arrival of Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods to challenge Gilgamesh. Rather than defeating one another, the two form a profound friendship, and their bond drives much of the epic's emotional core. Together, they embark on daring adventures, from confronting the monstrous Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest, to slaying the bull of heaven, an act that incurs the wrath of the gods. The death of Enkidu marks a somber shift in the narrative. Stricken with grief and a newfound awareness of his own mortality, Gilgamesh sets off on a quest to discover the secret of eternal life. His journey is both physical and philosophical, taking him to the edges of the known world and beyond. He meets figures like Utnapishtim, a man granted immortality after surviving a catastrophic flood, a story that bears striking similarities to the later biblical tale of Noah. However, by the end of the epic, Gilgamesh fails to achieve immortality. Instead, he returns to Uruk with a greater understanding of what it means to be human, finding solace not in eternal life, but in the legacy he leaves behind. What makes the Epic of Gilgamesh remarkable is its exploration of themes that remain relevant today. It delves into friendship, loss, the limits of human ambition, and the inevitability of death. These universal ideas allowed the story to transcend its original cultural context, making it one of history's most enduring narratives. Beyond Gilgamesh, Mesopotamia produced a variety of myths, featuring gods like Inanna, Marduk, and Enlil. These stories often revolved around creation, cosmic battles, and humanity's interaction with the divine, portraying a universe where the gods played an active, sometimes volatile role in human affairs. Myths were deeply woven into Mesopotamian culture, presented not just as things to be read or recited, but as events to be experienced. During religious festivals, these stories would come alive through ritual performances, hymns, and reenactments, pulling entire communities into the drama of gods and heroes. At temples and royal courts, scribes inscribed these tales onto clay tablets, ensuring their preservation for future generations. The act of recording myths was not just about safeguarding tradition, it was a statement of cultural pride and identity. For centuries, parts of the Epic of Gilgamesh were lost, scattered across fragments of tablets uncovered in the ruins of cities like Nineveh. It wasn't until the 19th century that much of it was rediscovered and pieced together, a process that still continues to this day. These rediscovered tablets revealed not only the survival of the epic, but also its profound connection to stories from later cultures. The parallels with biblical and classical traditions suggest that these ancient Mesopotamian myths laid the groundwork for entire literary and religious traditions that followed. The myths of Mesopotamia, and Gilgamesh in particular, reveal a civilization deeply preoccupied with questions of life and death, human purpose, and the divine. They were more than stories. They became a medium through which Mesopotamians could explore their relationship with the world, the gods, and each other. By preserving these tales, Mesopotamian scribes ensured their ideas would echo long after the fall of their cities, shaping the epics and literature of civilizations to come. The Mesopotamian afterlife wasn't a land of celestial rewards or fiery punishments. Instead, it was envisioned as a shadowy underworld called the land of Ereshkigal, the Queen of the Dead. This realm was a silent, bleak expanse where all souls, kings and commoners alike, wandered in darkness and dust. It was a place of sorrows, secluded from the world of the living and permanent. Unlike the later beliefs in paradise or infernos, Mesopotamians saw death as inevitable and absolute, offering neither judgment nor reprieve. It wasn't about morality or deeds in life. It was simply a return to the earth. This outlook made their rituals for the dead all the more important, as they focused not on what happened after death, but on how to preserve ties to ancestors and avoid lingering spiritual disturbances. Burial customs reflected the social hierarchy of the time. Wealthier individuals often had elaborate tombs, complete with ornate grave goods meant to ensure comfort in the afterlife. Objects such as jewelry, tools, ornaments, and food offerings were common, showcasing both the reverence for the dead and the belief that fragments of the living world could follow them into death. On the other hand, commoners were usually laid to rest in modestly prepared pits, often directly beneath their homes. This practice kept families physically close, even after a loved one passed. One unchanging rule, however, spanned all classes. The dead had to be properly buried. To remain unburied was to risk becoming an ettimu, a restless ghost. These spirits, fueled by the absence of ritual and respect, were thought to haunt the living, disrupting harmony by bringing sickness, misfortune, or madness. Mesopotamia's royal burials provide the most dramatic glimpse into their ceremonial approaches to death. Excavations at the royal cemetery of Uruk unearthed what archaeologists dubbed death pits. These burial sites contain not just the rulers themselves, but dozens of attendants, court musicians, and animals, all seemingly sacrificed to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. Attendants were arranged in orderly positions, suggesting they entered willingly or were ritually prepared for their task, a chilling reminder of the connections between life, death, and service. Chariots, oxen, and instruments were also buried, showing that the concept of honoring the deceased extended to maintaining their authority and lifestyle beyond death's door. The living, meanwhile, maintained contact with the dead through frequent offerings. Families regularly left food and drink either at grave sites or within household altars to sustain loved ones in the underworld. Such offerings were essential because neglecting these obligations risked disturbing the delicate peace between the living and the dead. Priests or even specialized exorcists were sometimes called upon to calm or banish angry spirits, using specific chants, amulets, and figurines in their rituals. This close involvement of the dead in the living world emphasized that death, while final, didn't mean complete separation. Despite the grim depiction of the underworld, Mesopotamians were deeply concerned with creating a legacy, believing that remembrance by the living offered a kind of pseudo-immortality. Tomb inscriptions and carefully prepared burial goods reflected the desire to be remembered and honored. Kings and elites often sought to immortalize themselves through grand donations to temples or monumental accomplishments, while commoners relied on familial memory. For both, memory served as a bridge, giving meaning to their lives in contrast with the unknown darkness of Ereshkigal's domain. It was this balance of legacy, ritual, and respect that allowed Mesopotamians to embrace life while preparing, with pragmatic resolve, for the inevitability of death. Cuneiform. Cuneiform is known as the world's first writing system, developed around 3200 BCE by the Sumerians in ancient Mesopotamia. Its origins were humble, starting simply as pictographs, basic drawings on clay tablets used to record goods like grain, livestock, and beer. Over time, these early depictions evolved into abstract symbols, growing more streamlined and efficient as communication needs expanded. The system's name, cuneiform, comes from the Latin word for wedge shape, describing the marks made by pressing a sharpened reed stylus into soft clay. This straightforward technique created sharp, angular impressions that have survived thousands of years. Initially, cuneiform fulfilled practical purposes in daily life. It revolutionized trade, as merchants and temple officials used it to track transactions, taxes, and property inventories. Economic stability depended on accurate record-keeping, and writing made it possible to maintain consistency across cities and even empires. However, its uses didn't stop there. As cuneiform developed, it began to encompass a wide array of subjects, preserving laws, prayers, contracts, myths, and even scientific observations. Ancient Mesopotamia quickly transitioned from an oral culture to a written one, where knowledge could be stored and passed down in physical form. The introduction of cuneiform dramatically altered the fabric of society. Bureaucracy flourished, as rulers could now issue written decrees to their officials, creating a structured administration that stretched over vast regions. Trade became more complex and reliable, with merchants able to seal contracts and agreements that could be referenced long after a deal was made. Writing also enabled the preservation of cultural identity. The Sumerians and their successors, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, were able to chronicle not only their laws and economies, but also their religious and mythological worldviews, creating a shared history across generations. Cuneiform wasn't just for the elite, though its mastery was highly specialized. Learning it required intensive training, leading to the creation of edubas, or tablet schools. Aspiring scribes attended these schools for years, practicing by copying word lists, legal codes, and mathematical problems onto clay. The process was laborious. Cuneiform featured hundreds of unique characters, each with multiple meanings depending on context. For those who succeeded, their skills offered access to prestigious roles in temples, palaces, and trade, where literacy was a valuable currency of power. One of the most fascinating aspects of cuneiform is the sheer volume of material it left behind. Over 500,000 clay tablets have been discovered so far, providing an incredible window into Mesopotamian life. Many documents are surprisingly detailed: financial accounts for temple workers, letters between merchants, school exercises from students, and even court records. Among these, one of the most significant is the work of Enheduanna, a priestess and poet who lived in the 23rd century BCE. She is often credited as the first known author in history, and her hymns, written in cuneiform, are signed with her name, a rare example of individual expression preserved from the ancient world. Cuneiform endured an astonishingly long time, remaining in use for over 3,000 years, far longer than modern alphabets like Latin. It adapted to serve multiple languages and cultures, evolving alongside the civilizations that used it. Yet, its significance extends beyond the artifact itself. Writing transformed Mesopotamia into one of the earliest literary civilizations, enabling the preservation of its myths, knowledge, and innovations long after the fall of its great cities. Cuneiform wasn't merely a tool for communication, it was a key turning point in history. The ability to write shifted humanity from prehistory to recorded civilization, creating a foundation for storytelling, governance, and culture that endures to this day. Mathematics and astronomy in Mesopotamia weren't just intellectual exercises. They were practical sciences that shaped daily life, from managing crops to marking the passage of time. The Mesopotamians pioneered advanced mathematical systems built around a sexagesimal, or base 60 system. This unique approach to numbers gave rise to conventions we still use today, like dividing hours into 60 minutes and circles into 360 degrees. This wasn't a coincidence. The system's flexibility made it ideal for precise calculations, whether that meant adjusting irrigation schedules or carving geometric patterns onto temple walls. Clay tablets from this period reveal surprisingly sophisticated mathematical texts, including multiplication tables, division problems, and even square root calculations. Geometry, too, played a role in land surveying and architectural planning, essential for a civilization that built structures as immense as ziggurats. Astronomy was equally practical. Ancient Mesopotamians tracked the stars, planets, and moon with precision, applying this knowledge to create the first lunar calendars. Their 12-month calendar was based on the moon's cycles, but to keep it aligned with the solar year, they occasionally added extra days, a process that laid the groundwork for modern chronologies. These calendars weren't just for keeping track of planting and harvesting times. They were also designed to map religious festivals, which tied the rhythms of the earth to those of the heavens. Astronomers working in temples charted movements of celestial bodies to predict eclipses or changes in weather patterns, often interpreting these events as messages from the gods. For them, astronomy wasn't just a science, it was deeply intertwined with spirituality and governance. One of the most innovative contributions of Mesopotamian astronomy was their division of the day into 24 hours. This method of timekeeping, derived from their mathematical base 60 system, remains globally standard today. But their work with the skies didn't stop at counting hours. They also identified constellations that are still familiar to us. Star lists from Mesopotamia name constellations like Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio, showing that their celestial studies had both practical and symbolic significance. These patterns became part of their mythology and, over time, evolved into precursors of the zodiac system. The connection between astronomy and their beliefs was undeniable. Priests acted as both scientists and spiritual interpreters, reading celestial alignments or planetary motion as omens for kings and kingdoms. The positioning of Jupiter, Venus, or the phases of the moon could decide the timing of a battle, a temple renovation, or even a royal marriage. Astrology and astronomy were inseparable. One served as a tool of prediction, the other as a symbol of divine agency. What's especially fascinating is how far their mathematical advancements extended. Some clay tablets reveal an understanding of basic trigonometry and algebra, predating Greek contributions by more than 1,000 years. For example, these early mathematicians solved problems involving the areas of fields, the length of diagonal lines, and even ratios for construction projects. They also used mathematics to organize society at a macro level, calculating food rations, measuring land for taxation, or designing canals that sustained entire cities. Their ability to blend abstract thought with practical needs speaks to an extraordinary level of ingenuity. The interplay of mathematics and astronomy fed directly into their monumental architecture and irrigation systems. Builders used precise measurements for ziggurats, ensuring their steps aligned symmetrically, while astronomers consulted the stars to determine the best days for construction rituals. Management of agricultural yields, storing grain surpluses, and distributing temple offerings also rested heavily on numerical logic, cementing the importance of mathematics in both rural and urban life. What's truly remarkable is how Mesopotamian knowledge rippled outward. Their discoveries in mathematics, timekeeping, and stellar observation didn't die out with their civilization. Greek, Roman, and later Islamic scholars inherited and advanced this knowledge, carrying the legacy of Mesopotamian science into the modern world. Without their inventions, the precision of today's time, calendars, and even geometry might look very different. Medicine in ancient Mesopotamia was a unique combination of practical skills and spiritual practices, shaped by the belief that illness could arise from both the physical world and the divine. Diseases were often seen as punishments from the gods, the work of angry spirits, or the result of breaking taboos. This belief system created a dual approach to healing, employing both physical remedies and spiritual interventions. Two main types of healers emerged to address these needs: the Asu, who focused on treating the body, and the Asipu, who addressed supernatural causes. The Asu were akin to physical doctors, relying on herbal remedies, bandages, and poultices to treat ailments. They applied oils, created salves, and sometimes performed surgeries for wounds or fractures. Their work revealed an understanding of injury and infection, even at this early stage. Babylonians appeared to have practiced early forms of surgery, including treatments for cataracts, as described on clay tablets that detail knife techniques and antiseptic washes for wounds. Their practical tools and remedies weren't entirely dissimilar from aspects of folk medicine today. Substances like honey, beer, and milk were commonly used, demonstrating their use of everyday resources to combat ailments. Meanwhile, the Asipu worked as spiritual healers or exorcists and played a crucial role in treating illnesses believed to be caused by gods, demons, or malevolent spirits. They performed rituals, recited protective spells, and used incense or amulets in their attempts to drive out unseen forces. Healing extended beyond physical recovery. Patients were often purified through ceremonial practices as part of their spiritual renewal. This blending of medicine and magic ensured that Mesopotamians addressed not just the body, but the invisible forces surrounding a person's health. Written records from Mesopotamia reveal an astonishing level of detail about their medical practices. Thousands of clay tablets document symptoms of illness, expected prognoses, and prescribed treatments, forming what could be seen as some of the earliest diagnostic manuals. For example, if a patient presented with specific symptoms, the tablet would outline potential outcomes and remedies. What makes these records remarkable is their systematic approach. Recognizing patterns and cataloging them provides insight into how Mesopotamians connected observation with treatment. In this way, they laid the groundwork for methods of clinical documentation and observation familiar to us today. Healthcare in Mesopotamia extended beyond individual practitioners. Temples dedicated to deities like Gula, the goddess of medicine and healing, became centers of care. These temples housed both the expertise of healers and the spiritual rituals required for recovery. Offerings and prayers to Gula would accompany more physical treatments provided by Asu or Asipu. This connection between temple life and medicine reflects the inseparability of health and faith in Mesopotamian culture. Medicine was so integral to their society that it was regulated under their laws. Hammurabi's Code, one of the earliest known legal codes, included specific regulations for medical practitioners, including fees for their services and severe penalties for failure. If a surgeon's operation resulted in harm or death, they could face punishments as harsh as amputation or death themselves. These legal stipulations reveal not only the high stakes of medical work, but also the value placed on accountability in administering treatments. The Mesopotamians believed that the spiritual world influenced all aspects of life, and illness was no exception. Angry ghosts or demons were thought to cause certain types of affliction, requiring spiritual cleansing or even exorcisms led by priests or specialized healers. These rituals often involved the use of amulets, figurines, or chants, which served both to protect the living and to pacify restless spirits. The persistence of this belief underscores how deeply rooted their fear of the unseen world was in daily life. Though steeped in their own culture, Mesopotamian medical practices influenced neighboring civilizations, leaving behind a legacy. Evidence suggests that aspects of their knowledge, particularly in pharmacy and diagnosis, impacted both Egyptian medicine and later Greek traditions. The mix of observation, practical treatment, and spiritual care created an enduring foundation, showing how ancient societies like Mesopotamia straddled science and belief in their pursuit of healing. Music and art were deeply ingrained in Mesopotamian life, serving as more than simple forms of expression. They played essential roles in religion, celebrations, and even the mundane routines of daily existence. Music, for example, was not just reserved for entertainment. It was a vital part of temple ceremonies, royal courts, and communal gatherings. Musicians used instruments like lyres, harps, and flutes to create melodies that accompanied hymns, rituals, and processions, while drums and rattles added rhythm to both festivals and military marches. These weren't just casual performances. Music was thought to connect humans to the divine, a way of communicating with the gods and creating harmony between the earthly and spiritual realms. One of the most iconic examples of Mesopotamian music is the lyre of Uruk, discovered in a royal burial. This magnificent instrument, dating back over 4,500 years, was inlaid with gold and lapis lazuli, featuring a carved bull's head that symbolized strength and vitality. The lyre's design and craftsmanship show how music was both a functional art form and a display of wealth and power. Musicians who played such instruments were often valued members of temple staffs or courtly circles, demonstrating the prestige associated with musical talent in Mesopotamian society. Visual art, like their music, was equally purposeful. Every sculpture, carving, and pottery piece carried symbolic and practical significance. Cylinder seals, for instance, were not only tools for securing documents or marking ownership, but also miniature works of art. Each seal was carved with intricate scenes that often depicted gods, mythological creatures, or daily activities. When rolled onto wet clay, these cylindrical carvings left detailed impressions, making them an early form of personal identification. Because no two seals were alike, they acted much like modern ID cards or signatures, blending functionality with artistic expression. Narrative art was another hallmark of Mesopotamian creativity. While many of us think storytelling in visual form is a modern concept, Mesopotamian artists were creating sequences of scenes on plaques and reliefs centuries before comic strips or film. These carvings told vivid stories of battles, religious ceremonies, or divine myths, immortalizing events and legends in stone. Gods and animals frequently appeared in these scenes, often symbolizing divine protection, royal power, or the forces of nature. The interplay between themes of power, spirituality, and daily life demonstrates how art wasn't separate from society, it was seamlessly woven into the culture's identity. Personal adornments also reflect the creativity of Mesopotamian artisans. Men and women alike wore jewelry, including beaded necklaces, earrings, and rings made from materials like gold, silver, and rare stones that were often brought in through trade. Cosmetics were another aspect of personal presentation. Kohl eyeliner, used by both genders, was worn not only for its aesthetic appeal, but also for practical purposes, like reducing glare from the sun or repelling insects. Oils and perfumes added another layer of refinement, showing that personal grooming was as much about care as it was about status. Beyond personal items, their creativity extended into leisure. Artifacts like combs, mirrors, and board games give us a glimpse into their everyday joys. The Royal Game of Ur, an ancient board game found in a royal tomb, reveals how play and competition were valued across generations. These objects, adorned with intricate designs, were not just functional, they underscored the Mesopotamian appreciation for beauty, even in the simplest activities. Decorative objects, too, reveal the extent of Mesopotamia's cultural connections. Shell inlays, ivory, and lapis lazuli frequently adorned jewelry and furniture, often sourced through expansive trade networks. Such materials highlighted the Mesopotamians' ability to transform imported resources into stunning works of art. This blending of local craftsmanship with foreign materials shows their role as a hub of cultural exchange, with artisans absorbing influences from other regions and integrating them into their own styles. Whether it was the haunting melody of a lyre in a temple, the stories preserved in a carved cylinder seal, or the elegant simplicity of a bead-strung necklace, Mesopotamian music, art, and personal items weren't just decorative or utilitarian. They reflected the culture's values, ambitions, and connection to the divine, offering a vivid window into a society that found beauty in both the monumental and the everyday. Mesopotamia, often referred to as the cradle of civilization, witnessed the rise and fall of some of the most influential empires of antiquity. Over millennia, city-states like Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria flourished with innovation and power before succumbing to waves of collapse. These declines were seldom abrupt or rooted in a single cause. Instead, the downfall of Mesopotamian societies unfolded through a mix of war, invasion, natural challenges, and internal weaknesses, factors that a rapidly growing civilization found difficult to sustain. The Akkadian Empire, established around 2334 BCE, was the first to unite the diverse city-states of Mesopotamia into a single empire. However, its fall roughly 2 centuries later demonstrates how delicate early urban networks could be. Around 2150 BCE, this vast empire faltered under pressure from Amorite invasions to the north, and what scholars believe to have been devastating droughts as climate conditions shifted. These environmental events weren't mere inconveniences. They turned fertile farmland into salty wasteland, cutting food production and forcing migrations that upset the region's fragile balance. This vulnerability to environmental stress would become a recurring challenge faced by its successors. Babylon's history provides another glimpse of the fragile might of Mesopotamian empires. In 1595 BCE, Babylon suffered an abrupt shock when the Hittites swept into the city, looted its treasures, and departed just as suddenly. This one-time raid left the city in political disarray, but Babylon would later rebuild, reaching its golden age under rulers like Nebuchadnezzar II. However, by 539 BCE, it fell again, this time to the expanding Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. Interestingly, accounts suggest Cyrus took Babylon in a mostly peaceful conquest, symbolizing the subtle yet effective methods of later empires. The end of Babylon as an independent power marked a turning point, as native Mesopotamian rule transitioned into dominance by external forces. The Assyrian Empire shares a similar trajectory. Known for its military innovations and cultural depth, Assyria emerged as a ferocious power, and cities like Nineveh became symbols of enormous wealth and strength. However, internal struggles and relentless warfare exposed its vulnerabilities. By 612 BCE, a combined force of Medes and Babylonians overthrew Nineveh, reducing the imposing capital to ruins. Its collapse revealed the dangers of overextension, as constant territorial expansion required immense resources that even the richest empire couldn't sustain indefinitely. Of course, not all declines were purely human-made. Archaeologists have uncovered compelling evidence that climate played a profound role across various periods of Mesopotamian collapse. Extended droughts, combined with rising soil salinity from centuries of irrigation, chipped away at agricultural productivity, a reality that empires could not easily adapt to. As crops failed, food shortages exacerbated internal unrest, migrations surged, and cities couldn't maintain the infrastructure necessary for survival. Some cities that thrived on trade, like Uruk and Ur, found their networks fractured and unable to recover. Although Mesopotamian culture faded after centuries of invasion by the Greeks, Romans, and eventually the Arabs, it left an enduring legacy. The fall of cuneiform writing by 75 CE symbolized the end of an era, but its collapse simply made space for other systems of communication, like alphabet-based writing, to grow. The advancements created in Mesopotamia, language, legal codes, architectural techniques, even astronomical knowledge, became woven into the fabric of later civilizations. Persia adopted many of its practices, and subsequent empires preserved traces of its innovations. In the end, Mesopotamia did not simply disappear. Even as its cities crumbled and empires passed into history, the lessons of its early urban experiments were carried forward and built upon. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates never stopped influencing the wider world. It shifted, adapted, and transformed, embedding its identity into the story of human progress. Mesopotamia's impact on human civilization is almost impossible to overstate. This ancient region didn't just produce advancements in one area, it laid the foundation for many of the systems, tools, and concepts that make up modern society. At its core was the invention of writing, cuneiform, which emerged around 3200 BCE in Sumer. Initially developed as a way to keep track of transactions, it soon extended to recording laws, stories, prayers, and scientific observations. With cuneiform, humanity moved beyond oral traditions to leave behind a permanent record of thoughts and achievements. It wasn't just a technological breakthrough, it marked the birth of literacy and the preservation of knowledge. Another cornerstone of Mesopotamian legacy was the idea of codified law. The most famous example is the Code of Hammurabi, created around 1750 BCE by the Babylonian king Hammurabi. This written collection of laws covered everything from property rights and trade regulations to criminal behavior and marriage contracts. While many of its punishments were harsh by modern standards, the code also emphasized fairness and accountability, introducing concepts such as the presumption of innocence. Long after Hammurabi's reign, echoes of this system have influenced legal traditions worldwide, from ancient Rome to contemporary law. Their contributions didn't stop at symbolism and governance. They were also masters of practical innovation. Mesopotamian cities were meticulously planned, with advanced irrigation networks that sustained dense populations in an otherwise harsh environment. Temple economies, organized around massive ziggurats and granaries, kept cities thriving by managing resources efficiently. In turn, this emphasis on record-keeping and centralized planning became the template for urban societies across the Middle East and beyond. These cities weren't just functioning, they were setting new standards for how people could live together on a large scale. The people of Mesopotamia also gave us an understanding of time that we still use today. They divided the day into 24 hours and the hour into 60 minutes because of their sexagesimal or base 60 number system. This same mathematical framework led to innovations in geometry, astronomy, and even trigonometry. The concept of a 360-degree circle originated with the Babylonians, and their astronomical records became the basis for tracking the movements of planets and stars. These calculations were used not just for agriculture or navigation, but also for predicting eclipses and creating calendars tied to religious festivals. Their artistic and literary creations reveal another layer of their influence. The Epic of Gilgamesh is widely regarded as the world's first great literary work, telling the story of a Sumerian king who embarks on a quest for immortality. This epic explores universal themes of friendship, mortality, and legacy, and it even contains a flood story similar to later accounts found in major religions like Judaism and Christianity. Beyond Gilgamesh, Mesopotamian myths and rituals continued to ripple throughout history, influencing the cultures of the Hebrews, Greeks, and Persians. Artifacts unearthed by archaeologists remind us of just how advanced and interconnected their culture was. The Ishtar Gate, ziggurats like the one at Uruk, and countless clay tablets containing detailed records and literature have reshaped our understanding of ancient history. These physical remnants provide a vivid picture of how Mesopotamians viewed their world and their place within it. Their ability to create such lasting monuments is further evidence of their ingenuity and ambition. Mesopotamia didn't just leave behind cities, laws, or art. It taught humanity how to think, organize, and innovate in ways that have endured through millennia. Even when their cities were reduced to ruins, their language, ideas, and discoveries lived on through the people and empires that followed. From writing and mathematics to science and urban governance, their contributions remained embedded in the rhythm of daily life, reminding us that the seeds of modern civilization were first planted in the fertile soil between the Tigris and Euphrates. Mesopotamia shaped the way we live, giving us writing, laws, science, and cities. From how we track time to how we govern, its legacy is everywhere. The land between two rivers sparked the system we still use today. Think about that. And if you want to keep exploring history's hidden roots, subscribe for more.